Recorded Books presents Cruel Winter of the Mountain Man by William W. Johnstone and J. A. Johnstone. Narrated by Jack Garrett. Chapter 1. Smoke Jensen was riding into a trap. He knew it. He could have gone back the way he came from, but that would have meant turning his back on trouble. Smoke wasn't in the habit of doing that. So he reined in, pausing atop a slight rise for a moment to reach behind him and get the sheepskin jacket that was rolled up and lashed behind the saddle. He unrolled the jacket and shrugged into it. Nothing unusual about that, since the air had a definite chill to it today. But the brief delay gave him a chance to look over the layout in front of him, without seeming like he suspected anything was wrong. Ahead of him, the terrain sloped gently down to a broad, level stretch of mostly sandy ground, dotted with clumps of hardy grass and the occasional scrubby mesquite tree, typical for the Texas Panhandle. To the left of that open ground rose a rocky ridge that ran for several hundred yards, looking like the spiky backbone of some giant creature mostly buried in the earth. To the right, the land fell away in a sweep of rugged badlands, dominated by red sandstone upthrusts and riven by gullies. It was picturesque, a smaller version of the more impressive Palo Duro Canyon a good ways south of here. Smoke had been there several years earlier, visiting the famous rancher Charles Goodnight. Out here in the middle of nowhere, border lines didn't mean much. Smoke was pretty sure he had crossed from New Mexico territory into Texas earlier that day, but he couldn't have said exactly where. All he knew was that he was headed for the town of Salt Lick, and if he kept going in this direction, he ought to find it. Assuming he escaped the trap he was riding into, he reminded himself. He wondered just who had laid that trap. As far as he knew, he didn't have any enemies in these parts. But like it or not, given the adventurous life he had led, hombres who wanted his scalp could pop up almost anywhere. That could literally be true in this case. Although the back of the Comanche resistance had been broken with their defeat at the Battle of Palo Duro Canyon several years earlier, along with the destruction of their horse herd in that same clash, small bands of warriors had been able to find enough mounts that they were still waging a sporadic war against the white settlers. They raided isolated ranches and preyed on lone pilgrims traveling across the staked plains. Smoke didn't know if the men waiting up ahead for him were red or white, and he didn't care. They were in his way and might try to stop him. That was all that mattered. He clucked to the big gray stallion and nudged it into motion with his knees. He'd been stopped for less than a minute to get the jacket out and put it on, but that had been plenty of time for him to take in the scene. A few minutes earlier, his keen eyes had picked up something that most men would have missed, a tendril of gray smoke rising against the gray sky, which he now knew had been coming from that ridge to the north, even though it had disappeared. When he had topped the little rise where he had just paused, he had seen a thin haze of dust settling to the right, just in front of those badlands. That had been enough to tell him immediately what had happened. Somebody who had made camp on that ridge had spotted him approaching. Quickly they had put out the fire, unaware that he'd already noticed the smoke. Some of them had galloped across the flat and hurried into those breaks to the south. Had all of them abandoned the camp and fled into the badlands? Were they just trying to get away? Smoke had no way of knowing, but his gut told him that the group had split up, some remaining hidden on the ridge, the rest taking cover in the rugged terrain to the south. That was an ambush in the making. Smoke trusted his instincts. He also knew he was being a little foolish, riding right into...
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.